Utah Politics.
We're digging deeper into the legislative session now with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have House Majority Leader Mike Schultz and House Minority Leader Brian King. Gentlemen, welcome to the show. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Glenn.
Representative Schultz, let's start with you. What is the most important thing you and your colleagues did this session?
You know what, Glenn, I think the budget. Before the session started, we knew that we would have a lot of one-time money available for the state. And so we as a majority caucus got together and decided that we wanted to make sure that this was the year that we made generational investments for the citizens of this state, not for just the citizens that are currently here, but for our kids and our grandkids going into the future. And so we set aside over $1 billion for transportation funding. And by the way, that was all three modes of transportation, roads, transit, and active transportation. Water was a big investment this year. Water's been at the top of everybody's minds with the drought that we've been in the last 2 years. We set aside a bunch of money to make generational investments in water conservation and making sure that we had dedicated water sources that could go to the Great Salt Lake into the future, so that we could really focus on the environmental issues that are happening with the lack of water in the Great Salt Lake. And so that was really important. Education. Over a 9% increase in education funding from the state this year. It's the biggest ever. It's one of our constituents' top priorities. We made sure that we delivered on that. And then also a tax cut, a significant tax cut for every Utahn, but really focused at the lower income and those on fixed incomes. Glenn, I think those generational impacts were big.
Representative King, what's the most important thing you and your colleagues did?
Glenn, you ask Schultz to give you the number one thing, and he goes off and rattles off a list of stuff. What's that all about?
It was that good.
It was a good session in the sense that we had a lot of money to spend, and many of the things that Mike talks about, I agree, are important. I think the biggest, most important thing that he didn't mention, but he could have easily, and I know he felt was important too, was a lot of money for affordable housing. We put, the governor asked us to put a lot of money into that because he's trying to make sure that we provide for those who are really struggling to make ends meet in terms of their housing. And we did end up with putting over $70 million into affordable housing. Less than we need, but a heck of a lot more than we have in past years. Very beneficial thing. I also think, I agree with him, transportation was a huge issue. The Great Salt Lake, this is the first year in which we really made substantial commitments and investments to making sure that the health of the Great Salt Lake is restored. I just hope we're not too late.
Representative Schultz, anything stand out as a missed opportunity to you?
You know, Representative Perucci had a great bill that would have given parents more choice in how they educated how we educated our kids in regards to, and mainly focused at the lower and middle class families of the state and allowing them choices whether to put their kids into private school or another option. I have to say we have one of the greatest education system, public education systems in the nation. What they do for our kids is amazing. They're great people. We have great teachers in the state, but let's not pretend that it works for every kid, for every situation. And so I think giving kids and parents the opportunity to do something different, I'm a little bit disheartened that we didn't get that one through.
Okay, that was the Hope Scholarship bill. Yeah. It barely got out of committee, and it failed pretty badly on the House floor. Representative King, you voted against it. Tell us why.
Yeah, it should have been voted down, and I'm glad it was. And it's the biggest miss. I mean, in some ways, but our education, we did fund education at higher levels in some ways. But look, for the bigger picture of this session is that we continue to undermine our investment in education, and we did it this year by cutting our income tax rates from 4.95 to 4.85, about $200 million. Every dollar that comes out of that education fund, the income tax revenue, comes at the expense of public education and higher education, and children and those with disabilities. Now, the Utah State Legislature has for over 25 years systematically and intentionally reduced the stream of income flowing into public education. They did it in 1996 when they passed a constitutional amendment to dilute the education fund by adding higher education into it. They did it again when we reduced the income tax from 5.0 to 4.95 back in 2018. We did it again with Amendment G in 2020 when we said that we're going to open up the education fund, the income tax revenue for use of something other than public and higher ed. And we did it again this year when we reduced the income tax by $200 million. This is a problem because Utah is already right at the bottom, along with Idaho, in per pupil spending. And our students' performance is actually in the middle of the pack. It isn't nearly as bad as our funding. But when we continually and intentionally make a decision to not invest in education, to take money away from our education fund whenever it gets too healthy, we're making decisions about the future of our state that are very detrimental and that reveal our values.
Brian, I got to jump in just
yeah,
really.
I'm going to let you respond, Representative Schultz. But first, I want to ask one thing. Some of your colleagues in the House Minority Caucus got on board with that income tax. Did you end up voting no on it?
I've ended up voting no.
Okay.
11 of the 17 of us ended up voting no. 6 voted yes.
Okay.
There were
some got on
things.
board because of the earned income tax credit and the Social Security.
There were some good things.
Representative Schultz, respond to what Representative King just said about education spending.
I was having a hard time keeping my mouth shut for that long.
It's not the first time. It's not the first time, Mike.
The good minority leader, there's a little bit of hypocrisy and double talk coming out of his mouth there for just a minute in regards to what we spend our education fund on, because his colleagues and the minority caucus actually supported a bill that would have taken a whole bunch of money out of education funding in regards to film incentives and given that money to Hollywood actors and Hollywood producers that film in the state of Utah. That money would have came directly from, or that money does come directly from the education fund. And in its original version, which the minority leader and his caucus supported, there were estimates that it could have been over $100 million in 5 years going to Hollywoods and to Hollywood actors and Hollywood producers for filming in this state. And so while he says he's against giving that money back to the citizens of the state, I just also want to point out that he voted in favor of giving that money to the Hollywood actors.
Representative King, address that real quick because I want to get to one other topic real fast.
We have hard choices and priorities that need to be made. The film investment bill put about another, I think it was $6 or $7 million toward luring film companies to Utah for the benefit disproportionately of rural Utah. That was what we were trying to do, and I think that that will help us in the future. That's a far cry from $200 million a year each and every year that the tax cut results in as a loss to the education fund.
Okay, I'd like to go into that deeper, but I want to get to one other thing real fast. On the last night of the legislative session, we saw the transgender athlete bill get substituted and pass both chambers. A lot of people upset, putting the issue aside, Representative Schultz, with the way that went down and the process and procedure. Why did you vote in favor of it?
I did, because I voted in favor of it last year. And so we talk about process, that's part of what we do up at the legislature. We had that opportunity to vote on it last year. We knew what we were voting on. The same legislature took it up last year. We took it up again this year. Representative Birkeland and others worked on it all session long. And we have to, Glenn, we have to protect our teenage girls in sports. We don't have a choice, in my opinion, in that. Certainly I agree that some of these transgender kids struggle, and we should find ways to support them, and I think we can. But doing it on the backs of our teenage girls is wrong, in letting biological males play with females in high school sports. It's wrong. We shouldn't do it.
Representative King, your thoughts on that bill and the way it played out in the final hours?
Yeah, we worked on that bill behind the scenes and in debates in committees all throughout the session, but it had been held on the board in the Senate for about 2 weeks before it came out at about 8:30 on Friday night after the filing period for the election closed, not coincidentally at 5 p.m. earlier in the day. And there was a complete ban. It was a completely different bill than what we'd been talking about before. The governor was caught by surprise. We as Democrats were caught by surprise. We asked for more time to consider it. The Senate Democrats did on the Senate floor. That request was refused, and it was jammed through in a way that is targeting in a very harmful way a vulnerable population of kids. This isn't a big problem. The Utah State High School Education or Athletic Association has dealt with it before. Other groups are dealing with it satisfactorily. This came up as an issue, quite honestly, because it was part of a culture war that folks on the other side of the aisle wanted to push.
Gentlemen, unfortunately, we've run out of time. We're going to have to end it on that note. Great discussion. I appreciate having both of you here. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Glenn.
Thanks, Glenn.
Stay with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break.